My name's Sarah. I'm from Inspira Advantage, and we have a really exciting webinar for you today called Med School Selection 101, Finding the Right Fit for You. So this is a great topic. Building your school list is so important, so I'm really excited to have you all here today. So in today's webinar, what we're going to be covering is we're going to go through the key criteria for choosing the right schools, how to assess your compatibility for schools. We'll talk about navigating rankings and data, and then we will also just hear some insider advice from our admission experts who are joining us today. So the webinar will be about 45 minutes of information, but we'll save some time at the end to make sure we get questions and answers. So just as a little bit of background on Inspira Advantage, we are a 15-year-old admissions consulting firm. We also specialize in helping students get accepted into top graduate healthcare programs. So that would be medical, residency, dental, vet, PA. You may have seen those on our website. So we have a 94% acceptance rate with the med school students that we work with. So we really believe in starting early, which is why we offer pre-health advising. And we start as early as freshman year, so college freshmen. And our team really helps students to, what we want to do with that pre-health advising is build a tailored academic timeline. So we start with academics like course selection, choosing a major, planning out your prereqs, GPA strategy, and helping you get involved in all of those impactful experiences like your research, shadowing, clinical and non-clinical volunteering, extracurriculars, leadership roles. So really just helping you build that long-term vision and make sure your application is going to stand out from the rest. Before we get into actually, the meat of it, like building your personal statement and interview prep. So these steps really lay a strong foundation to differentiate applicants and make them leave an impression on admissions. So in addition to the admissions consulting, we do have personalized one-on-one test prep for the MCAT. So our tutors work one-on-one with you, and then we go through and provide diagnostic tests, custom study plans. We do interim progress tracking, and students see an average of a 15-point score increase with 45 hours or more of tutoring. We also have a 60-hour tutoring program that has a 515 score guarantee. So once you've built your profile and taken your MCAT, when it's time to apply, that's where we have our all-inclusive application support. And so this is going to be unlimited support through your entire application cycle. So going line by line, building your activities list, your personal narrative, your school list, perfecting that personal statement. So it's unlimited edits and meetings with your advisor. And even after submission, we go through and provide interview prep, scholarship guidance, waitlist strategy. So we're by our students' side from the time they start all the way until they receive their acceptances. So our goal is simple, just helping students to create the most competitive candidacy, competitive application possible, and just ensuring our students shine in a competitive admissions landscape. So if you'd like to learn more, we can talk at the end of the presentation, but we do have free personalized consultations. So throughout this conversation today, you do have the chat box available. So as we go through today's presentation, I want everybody to be asking questions. There's no question too big or too small for our admission specialists to answer for us. But if we don't get to anything today, then you can always, reach out, set up that consultation so that we can talk one-on-one and go from there. So with that being said, I'd love to introduce our panelists today. Well, I'll let them introduce themselves and take over from here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Katie. I'm originally from California. Went to medical school in Virginia at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine in Richmond, Virginia. And now I'm currently in my 4th of 6 years in plastic surgery residency at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I have spent basically all of that time in some capacity either both teaching and advising, helping students improve their applications, both from the medical school and now residency perspective. And I've interviewed both medical school and residency applicants, so I'm pretty well versed in how to make your application shine.
Cool. And I'm Austin. I am earlier on in my journey. I'm currently an intern, transitional year resident, going into Stanford dermatology, which is where I went to med school. Originally from small town in Colorado, went to the University of Denver, and so Stanford was a big jump for me. And I think this webinar really hits home in terms of school choice. I think it's probably one of the more fun topics compared to things like the MCAT and other things like that, but it's nonetheless something to be taken very seriously. And hopefully both Katie and I and the rest of the team can help you get a step in the right direction doing all this.
Thanks, guys. All right, and with that, I think we will jump right in. I'll let you take over.
Okay, I'll just get us started. So this whole talk really is going to be kind of a broad overview with touching on some key topics and points. Hopefully you guys, if you have more specific questions, we can answer them at the end. But we're hoping to just kind of introduce the topics and the really important points here when picking the right school for you. So really understanding what truly matters in your decision is very important. And this varies by applicant. So some people will have higher priorities on one component than the other, but some things to consider are location, curriculum style, class size, campus culture, and there are probably so many others, but these are kind of the biggest 4, and we'll go more into detail in these in the next few slides. But you really also want to assess whether these schools' values and goals really match your own. And that can be hard to do just based on their online appearance. So their websites often look similar. And so really digging in, and we'll talk more about this later, but I won't kind of jump too far into the future here, but really digging in and figuring out what schools really meet your goals and your priorities and values.
Okay, so that was a lot all at once. And so we're going to take the next few slides to break down each element that was touched on here. And I think, honestly, number one for the majority of people, including, I would say myself, in that was location. And location means a lot of things. It can mean what setting are you going to learn and train in. It could mean how close are you to family or specific opportunities that you're connected with. It really can be an amalgamation of anything regarding the geography of where you may be going. And I think closely related to that, although often discrete in terms of the relationship, is this idea of like, what curriculum does it offer? And medical schools are constantly innovating on curriculums. I think a lot, at least when I was going through med school, are trending toward problem-based learning and going away from the traditional lectures. And I think there's a time and place for both of those, but you may have a specific learning style that fits better with one school over the other. And that's really important because you're going to get hit with that fire hydrant of information come that first year and beyond.
So like I mentioned, some other key factors to consider. One being class size, and this may affect you more than it initially kind of seems like it would. So class size really determines sometimes how close you are with your classmates, but also how close you are with the teachers and professors, and what support, individualized support you may be able to access. Not always the case, but sometimes having smaller class sizes gives you more kind of personalized, individualized access to professors if more help is needed. However, larger cohorts have their benefits as well, including like a diverse perspective of your student body. a diversity of experience as well, and networking opportunities. Maybe they come from the place that you'd like to go to or something like that. And so there are pros and cons to each, and certainly different people do better in different situations. And so that's something to consider for your own application. Another is campus culture. So this is more of like the academic, but also social environment that you're going to be spending your time in. So while you're going to be spending so much of your time studying and being academic, you wanted to make sure that the campus culture is one that would support that, whatever that looks like for you. But also that the city that you're living in or the environment that you're in would also support you from an emotional and mental well-being standpoint once you're, those, precious hours that you're not actively studying or taking tests or in school. So from both of those perspectives, the campus culture is an important thing to consider as well.
Okay. Getting more detailed about location. Again, it's kind of my favorite thing to talk about because I lived in Colorado all my life, and then suddenly I had to go to the birth, like Silicon Valley, which is really crazy for me. So I think there's a few factors to consider with location. And again, like these all have varying weight depending on your preferences, values, beliefs, so on and so forth. Yeah, I think one thing that's very underrated is your proximity to support systems, both your chosen family, your friends, whoever can support you through this very arduous journey is important to consider at this point, because unless you have already done it going into college or going studying abroad, being away from family can seem okay until you actually do it. And you don't want to find that out in medical school. So I think that's a really important factor to consider depending on your support systems, where they are and how much they positively or potentially negatively affect you. And I think another idea with this is a broad stroke, this idea of clinical opportunities. And oftentimes there's efforts in a lot of the bigger academic centers to provide a diverse experience in terms of more rural patient populations and more diverse urban patient populations. But you may have the choice to see, like, for example, be in the inner city most of the time versus being like 2 hours away from your main campus and actually doing a lot more hands-on stuff just because you have such a broad connection with the rest. For example, in Utah, like there's not many schools, or Colorado even. And so that's important to consider in terms of your preferences there as well. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer in terms of the training, but I would definitely consider that as one of the factors within this location category. And then a very important thing that's not so fun to talk about is cost of living. And I found that out the hard way moving to Palo Alto. Everything was 20% plus more expensive, sometimes twice as expensive. And that increased my student loan burden significantly. But I thought the training there was very strong and more than counteracted that. But every person's situation is different, and you have to seriously consider that. It's, again, not one of those things I really like talking about because I don't believe people should have to pick their training and preferences based on cost, but it is a reality for a lot of people. And I think that's something important to consider, is the cost of living surrounding that area too. And then finally, something that I found out that was a positive thing is this climate and lifestyle. Where are you going to be studying the whole time? Can you study outside? Is it the weather going to be nice enough? Are you able to do outside activities that you loved doing since you were a kid? Consider that in terms of the geography. Is there mountains or beaches nearby, or is this place well known for something you really like to do? I think that's something important to consider as well.
So touching more on diving a little bit deeper into the curriculum component that we mentioned as a key kind of factor in your consideration. So finding the right learning approach there. Schools, as Austin mentioned, schools are constantly kind of revamping or innovating their curriculum styles, especially when COVID hit and things had to be revamped and changed into a not telehealth, but like a remote access version. Most schools kind of vary between either a problem-based or group-based learning situation or a traditional lecture. And there are certainly some gray area that I'm missing in between, but those are the two most common types of curriculum. And so some folks learn better when they can talk things through and brainstorm with a group. And some folks learn better just kind of they get a lecture and they're able to kind of individually interpret that and learn that and take that in themselves. And that's actually I think a very important component here. I certainly know that I learn better one of those ways. And I think if you can find a school, and certainly pick a school, rank a school highly, say, that is going to be more suited for you to succeed, I think this is one thing to consider that may help you there. Oh, sorry, let me advance.
Okay. Now, class size is also something that became really important for me. I graduated with a high school class of, I think, 52, and then University of Denver was very small. I knew every pre-health, pre-dental, pre-med person there. And then I went to Stanford, which is a relatively small class, like 90-ish people. That's on the smaller side, right? Then you have certain med schools that are 200 plus, and that can give a diversity of experience in its own right, just by the sheer size or variations there. And jumping off of Katie's slide regarding the learning and curriculum, sometimes the smaller schools are more agile in terms of providing the more problem-based learning, just because you have smaller groups and you don't need as many facilitators. And that also imparts usually closer relationships with faculty because you have more one-on-one attention. It's just like in college, if you think about it. The difference between a 300-person, general chemistry class versus a 20-person OChem 3 class or whatever it may be. But there are advantages to larger schools too, because I think one of the things medical schools do really well, even better than college, is creating cohorts in which you can learn and grow with the people around you. And having a larger class size will allow you to do that even more, find your niche, find your group, and really grow in that experience. And oftentimes the larger class sizes also mean like you have a larger amount in quality of opportunities depending on funding sources and location and everything like that. So I think from the 30,000-foot view, thinking of, do you thrive in smaller environments or in bigger environments, is really, really important. And I think anyone can survive anywhere, but that is a preference I would definitely input into your spreadsheet.
So I think there you go. Hey.
Oh, sorry. I was just turning my microphone back on. So just wanted to do a quick check-in with everybody at this point. Go ahead and put your questions in the chat if you have any questions so far. On the screen here is a QR code. So if you did want to book a free consultation, you would be chatting with either myself or my colleague, Maddie. Just gives you some one-on-one time to chat with us. And then if you were interested in any of our programs along the way as well, those would all be 10% off for you. So we have a couple questions in the chat. The first one says, do you have access to Caribbean medical schools? So Stephen, I didn't know if you wanted to elaborate on that. I know from my point of view, we do assist students in applying to Caribbean medical schools. And that would go into the part where you and your counselor are working together and deciding, which schools are like reach, target, and safety options for you, or depend, they're going to help you decide what the best set of schools to apply to is for you. And so we definitely have experience helping students apply to Caribbean medical schools. We also have some great resources on our website, like guides to those schools as well. But if you meant something different by that question, drop it in the chat, or if Catherine or Austin have anything to add, let me know. But the next question said, when applying to out-of-state public medical schools, how important is it to have like close ties to that state or region? Is it worthwhile to apply to out-of-state public medical schools without such close ties?
What do you think, Austin?
I would reference the MSAR. It is such a good tool. And sorry, it stands for, I think, Medical School Application Resource, maybe? That's what I think it would stand for. I feel like this is a really important question in not wasting money, because I will say there are certain public med schools out there that probably accept anywhere from 80 to 90% in state. And to have such a low acceptance rate and then apply and you don't have ties there, it can be a waste of money, in my opinion, in that way. And what I'm mentioning with the MSAR is they have detailed statistics. It's like a one-time $30 or $40 fee on how many are like in-state, out-of-state applicants, how many they accept. Back when I was applying, it was much more rudimentary, but still very helpful in that way. So I would seriously consider that in terms of factoring in how you're going to choose and apply to things. So I feel like you can technically apply to those, but just know your chances will be lower if you see the statistics going out of your favor there.
Agreed. It's a little school by school basis, in my opinion. I got into and went to an out-of-state medical school that I had no ties in, never been to, don't know anyone in. So there are some that are better known for accepting out-of-state students, and there are some that are better known for rarely doing that. So I would just look into, I second the motion. Basically, I agree with the MSAR. I would look into those stats and make sure you're not wasting your money on schools that are unlikely to look at out-of-state applicants.
Yeah, that's great advice. We'll take one more question for this check-in. And just to follow up, he said he looked at the table with the information, and some schools have 20 to 30% out-of-state acceptance rates, but no info as to whether they're from that region or have close ties. So yeah, it sounds like that's like kind of.
I think in general it can, depending on if that school meets all your other requirements, and if you are otherwise a good candidate for that school, I think even without ties, it can be worth it to apply to a school that accepts a reasonable amount of out of state. Like, you don't have, my point is, you don't have to have ties to apply.
Yeah.
And the last question, just for this halfway point break, we're going to do a longer Q&A at the end, but they asked, how about students not having citizenship and green card? Particularly, they're asking about visa dependent students.
That's a tough one.
I think there maybe we're looking more at, like, when you're looking up the stats for schools, maybe more so looking at their international student acceptance rate. Again, I know on our website, we do have specific guides for international students applying to medical school, and advisors that specialize in helping international students apply as well. But maybe that's just like a separate statistic, not just out of state, but I don't know. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, I personally don't have a ton of experience with that, and I don't want to add too much into there without the experience needed, but I agree that we do have some resources within Inspira and some personalized consultants for that.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I importantly don't want to say when I don't know something. I think that's an important part about being a doctor. And I will say that maybe at this point, with the MSAR constantly evolving, that there's some more stats that you could help supplement what's on Inspira, and then you can make an informed decision there. But again, I think this is a question that bodes finding someone who's very specialized in that area, because I don't have that background either, but I know that we do have the resources for that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And same with, for those of you, like, when on our check-in page here, if you are booking a free consultation, we have 20, 30 minutes together to chat, but there's only so much deep diving we can do. So that's where it's our job to really connect you with the right advisor and right mentor that has that experience to take you through the process. But thank you guys so much for your questions. I'm gonna let Catherine and Austin jump back into the presentation here, and then we'll revisit more questions again at the end.
Okay, I'll just go ahead and sorry. Great. So coming back to what we were discussing before, the campus culture as a component of your decision making. So I've touched on this a bit already, but academic support as a piece of class size, as a piece of curriculum style, but really, like, what academic support resources are available to you as a student at each individual school. Again, this can be harder to find, but it is available on their websites. Looking for, a lot of medical schools have peer-to-peer tutoring opportunities or more formalized study groups. Some folks have kind of like a big SIB, little SIB situation in which you can get guidance from medical students ahead of you. And then there are, usually some kind of club or organization style, both academic and kind of social support from those perspectives. And then in regards to social fit, this has to do with the kind of overall culture of the school, but also the general location that you're in, and trying to identify an environment that would be well suited to you socially. So, maybe that's like you are a huge college football fan and you prioritize a school that has that availability to you. Something like that, where you're just going to be able to find your in-group easily.
Yeah, okay. Zooming out now. We were kind of bouncing around physical elements of choosing a medical school, but I think this idea of compatibility in the setting of long-term success is really important and really difficult at the stage that we're at right now. It's much easier, I think, for both of us to say like, oh yeah, we made the choice and long-term compatibility worked out great. But in this case, I think the thing I want to highlight on this slide is career aspirations differ based on your interest levels, your experience, if you have people in the family who are in medicine. Most importantly, look at the medical schools you're looking at and decide if they have the department or the residency to support. If you want to be a surgeon, you have to make sure that the medical students coming out of that program can maybe get into the surgery program you're thinking about. If you want to get into something like dermatology, there's certain schools that don't have dermatology departments, and it can make it really difficult to get into that residency. And that's not at all saying you have to know what type of doctor or professional you want to be at this case, but you do want to set yourself up for that long-term success. And I think that was one of the reasons I chose to go where I went, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I wanted to be in a place with the most opportunity to explore that. And that could differ. If you know exactly what you're going to want to do, and you know which residency program you want to get into, and you want to go to that school that's connected to it, go for it. But really evaluate that long-term as much as you can.
So in terms of how to evaluate that compatibility, both long-term and kind of when you're acutely in the process of being a medical student, things to look at. There are schools' mission statements. These all sound to me a little generic and they sound a little repetitive at times, but actually you can piece out from their mission statements what their true priorities are. There's usually a couple of themes that you can piece out, which may be helping the underserved, focus on research and innovation, focus on leadership, things like that, global surgery or global opportunities, global healthcare, things like that. So you can tease out from their mission statements what the school's priorities are, and you should make sure that those align with your own. Of course, you're probably at this stage open to a lot of things, but there are some things where perhaps your application and your interests lie in research and innovation. And so it would be important in that case to prioritize, hopefully, schools that have that same kind of goal and mission statement as your own interests. Looking at, similar to what Austin mentioned, you also want to look at residency match rates. Again, I highly reiterate the point that you do not need to know what specialty you're interested in at this point, but some people do. And if you already have that experience, and if you do know, looking ahead and making sure that this school has the capacity to get you into something that you're interested in is important. And if you don't, like Austin said, looking at this school has the capacity to expose you to all of the fields you may be interested in is also critically important. You can, in order to get this information, in addition to just looking at their websites, most places have some form of social media, Twitter or whatnot, that you can follow and can help expose you to like some of their culture or goings on that they're interested in doing. We can also attend campus tours. There's usually some form of like remote kind of meet and greet situation for some schools. And then it's always, if you have connections or have connections that know connections, it's really nice to talk to either alumni from that school or current students at that school that can give you kind of a better idea about what their experience has been like.
Okay. at the midway point, we were talking about the data and the MSAR. And I think this is where you start thinking beyond your preferences and looking at compatibility with what is known out there, the objective data about these schools. And there's a lot of data that you can see nowadays. I think sometimes is probably too much data out there, but it's broken down into the categories we may have already touched on lightly, but going through each. These ranking systems that are out here, whether it's US News and World Report, which is getting a lot of flack right now, or there's things like Doximity out there. There's all these companies that rank medical schools. And then the word of mouth, the Ivy Leagues, all that sort of stuff. I would, of course, take that as an introduction to the schools that you could potentially be reaching for. And I used it to take my shots in the dark and it worked out. But I think more importantly, it's to go beyond what the rankings are and look at the fit. I think easily people can just apply to the top 5 schools and you want to mold into that and just be that type of medical student, but that doesn't work out often. And that can lead to a lot of suffering. And so it's really, really important to continue judging fit using the things we all talked about up to this point to really understand if the rankings are those rankings for you. And again, residency match rates, it's getting a little advanced at this stage for that, but it is important to know that certain schools are better at matching certain specialties, and that's just the name of the game. And if you are even slightly interested in a specialty that can be competitive, plastic surgery, dermatology, orthopedic surgery, the list goes on there, it varies every year, then consider where those medical schools are placing them. And that can also harken back to their mission statement, whether primary care focused or research focused, that sort of stuff. And then finally, it's your competitiveness. And this goes into more of an objective compatibility, if you would call it that. This is where you look at GPAs, MCAT scores. There's this thing that came out after I got into med school where it was the Lizzie M score, which I've seen used with a lot of clients recently, that is like a composite of the two. And this allows you to create a list in which you can have the reach target safety schools. And I think beyond that, it's not really talking about your fit with this school. It's just more so the competitiveness and what you should be striving for should you want to go to that school.
Other kind of data pieces to inform your decision here. Financial considerations, we talked about this a bit already with cost of living, but actually in addition to cost of living of the city that you are considering, you also, I think, like Austin said, unfortunately, this is just a fact of life, should probably consider tuition costs, scholarship opportunities, and financial aid packages. So tuition costs in general are cheaper in state versus out of state. That being said, perhaps you don't have a lot of in-state opportunities, or those that are available you're not compatible with for one reason or another. But these are just things to consider. Usually on websites, on schools' websites as well, there can be scholarship opportunity information that you can find. If not, it's certainly reachable if you email one of their financial aid advisors associated with the school. They can help you kind of guide you as to like a list of what scholarship opportunities are available. And I'll just say personally, I was lucky enough to obtain some of that. So it's a possibility at probably most schools, but just looking into the details of that can be important. And then program outcomes, I think we've touched on this kind of sufficiently, but really looking at graduation rates, post-graduation employment, but also where people are matching and things like that. I'll just second what Austin said a slide ago. The prestige of schools, to me, is a little bit overhyped. I think a doctor that graduates from Harvard is equivalent essentially to a doctor that graduates from anywhere else. I think kind of no matter where you go, you're going to do better at schools that fit you better and fit your interests and passions better. And so that's my little 2 cents soapbox on that. But I totally agree with what Austin said.
Okay. Now, I think you're already accomplishing part of what's on this slide, and that's attending webinars and just learning about how do you look at medical schools. So I think to the far right, when you're talking about webinars, fairs, open houses, you're already on the right path for that. Whether you're a student, a parent, a loved one in this webinar right now, this is a wonderful first step. And I think to go into the specifics, each school website has a different amount of detail and unique features to it. And that I say to every client I work with, you have to look at the websites because they have little gold nuggets that may or may not make that decision for you as to whether you want to apply or go there. And on top of that, you'll be more informed should you get an interview there. And I think the catalogs can sometimes be very generic, but like Catherine said, with the mission statements and values, once you get reading a few of them, you start to appreciate the nuances a little bit better there. And then we mentioned the MSAR. Again, I think it's the single most high yield resource that's out there for med school stuff. It's official, it's low cost, it guided me, and it's comprehensive and systematic, because a lot of these things, like you go into school websites, there's going to be things you can't find that are on certain websites and not others. But the MSAR at least has uniform data across most of the schools. And then finally, firsthand insights are really important, and those can be really hard to get at the stage you're at right now. Of course, knowing some near peers is helpful for your local schools, but there are open houses. There's more virtual stuff now that COVID has swept through the country, and that's more available. So hopefully that's a more feasible thing than what it was a few years ago. But I think that can be really valuable to see the attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs of the students and faculty you may be joining.
The only thing I'll add to that is just the firsthand insights are priceless, but I would just caution you about seemingly firsthand insights, perhaps on Reddit threads or other online sources where you actually don't know what that person's experiences are or how well informed they are and things like that. There's a lot of things that go on those threads that are not totally accurate and can be really quite intentionally or unintentionally misleading. So I would just caution you about kind of taking to heart everything you read online. So finalizing your school list, I really love this portion of advising. I think this is like a really exciting thing to do with clients. You always want to, and it's our job as advisors and counselors, but also your job as students and applicants to create a balanced list. So this is, I think, so underappreciated and is such a skill and art to create a list that perfectly combines reach, safety, and target schools. You want to create this proportion of each of those that really gives you the best opportunity to succeed. And that doesn't just mean getting in somewhere, but getting into somewhere that really will suit you well. And so that obviously has a lot to do with your application and things like that, but really creating a well-tailored list is so important. I can't tell you the number of applicants actually re-applicants that I've worked with that didn't get in, probably only because their list was not quite tailored correctly. That's just a reality. So this is really important. And then prioritizing fit over prestige. Well, I actually forgot that bullet point was on here and I already made that point. So I am such a strong proponent of this. The prestige, especially now as a resident who is thinking about going into practice in the near future, really does not matter where you went to medical school. You can kind of make the best of any situation, no matter where you go to school. If you are driven and interested in things, you will make that happen. So I think fit over prestige always.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. So there's been a lot thrown at you in the last half hour plus. I think breaking it down into a stepwise function, you'll notice that steps 1 and 2 are we covered 2 first and then went to 1. But I think when you're looking at this, you're faced with a novel experience. You don't know what elements of the fit that potentially pertain to you more than others, besides thinking about location, climate, and whatnot, which is why it's really important to think about researching the school first, so you can actually generate your feelings of looking at the school's website, hearing from people, faculty, resources like the MSAR, and starting to develop, ooh, I kind of like that, or I didn't like that. That'll allow the fit to come better than if you just immediately did a pro-con sheet on all the fit factors that we talked about. I think it's really important to get the so-called primary literature on these schools to develop your own set of values that you can then judge the fit from. So I think going 1 to 2 rather than 2 to 1 is really important there. And then again, I think personally, number 3 was one of the most important steps, and that's seeking guidance from whoever you can speak to. And that's talking about personal things. Again, like Catherine said, not anonymous people, not Reddit threads, nothing like that. Absolutely nice. But it's terrible sometimes to go down those rabbit holes, but more so, who are those trusted advisors that have a good track record of getting people into medical school? Who are those near peers who are really succeeding, that, or maybe they have siblings or other members of their family that you can talk to get a sense of, like, even something as quote unquote simple as choosing your own specialty in this way, and like getting a sense of what you want to go for and what their thoughts are. But importantly, with that third step, do not succumb to absorbing the values of the other person. And this is so much easier said than done. I still deal with this every day. It's like staying true to yourself. You need to learn from other people so you don't make the same mistakes, but at the same time, staying true to yourself, even if your values are different from your closest mentor, is really important at that step.
So just to recap a bit, some key takeaways: focusing on schools that align with who you are, your values, your goals, your passions, and your learning preferences and interests. This is key. This is the most important thing you can do research on in terms of finding out which schools do what. Using data and rankings as tools, but prioritizing personal fit for long-term success. Key also, data is data, and it's helpful in some ways, but it's also not the only thing you should be making decisions on. And then seeking insights, we already touched on this quite a bit, from current students, alumni, and advisors to help make informed decisions. I'll add to Austin's point. I feel the same way. Sometimes your mentors, you can't decide if you want to be like them or want to do the thing they're doing. So just because you respect and appreciate someone's opinion does not necessarily mean that you're going to need to follow in their footsteps, but certainly take as much advice as you can and use it and incorporate it into your own decision making. This is a really fun, exciting process for you guys, and can be nerve-wracking and anxiety-provoking as well. But I think my key takeaways from this for you is just do the research you need to do to feel comfortable in your decision-making. If you need a little extra support, Austin and I and others like us at Inspire are always happy to help guide you just with our experience in doing this. But it should be overall a fun and exciting thing for you. It's like the first step on the rest of your kind of journey.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better. And I feel like overall, your goal should be, like this slide says, make an informed and confident decision. And in that way, confidence can be lacking at every stage of the journey. I still am not fully confident, and I lean into that, knowing that you're supposed to be learning for the next whatever it is, like near a decade plus, depending on what you choose, right? And in that way, this anxiety that comes naturally from a process such as this, I hope you can turn into excitement, because this is really an exciting point, and it works out the way it's supposed to work out. So long as you put in the work and research necessary to figure out your fit, your compatibility, use the data to your advantage, and then making the choices and being confident about those choices and not looking back. And again, we're talking from, I believe, very privileged positions of getting into our residencies of choice and looking back and being like, oh, it may not have been so bad. And we probably repressed a lot of that. And, I probably should only be speaking to myself at that point. But I think at the end of the day, fit is so much more important than prestige. I think we've said that 3 or 4 times, but I cannot explain that enough. Just going through the evolution that I have personally, I wouldn't do it any other way. And in fact, I would possibly recommend a lot of people I met along my path to have gone back and chosen something for fit over prestige. So.
Well, thank you guys for having us. And obviously we will answer more questions in the chat. But if you want to take over.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. So real quick before we get to the questions, we do have a little feedback form here for you on the screen. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to scan the QR code, we would really love your feedback on our webinar as we put these on for students. So we want to make sure you're getting the most out of these. Any thoughts, or if there are particular topics that you would love to have a webinar on in the future from us, we'd love to hear from you. So really value your feedback there. But let's dig into the questions here. I'm going to go up a little bit. So someone asked, when a student's applying, does it matter if a student has family members who are doctors? And what about students who attended undergrad from like an Ivy League school? Does that matter as well? And I get that question a lot from students too.
What do you think, Austin? Go for it.
I feel like I may be, and a lot of people are, but a living example of fitting this. Like, I have no one in medicine, not even nurse, pharmacist, whatever it may be, in immediate or extended family. Went to a really rural, challenging high school. University of Denver is not an Ivy League by any means, but I had a scholarship there, and I chose that because I wanted to be close to family and to have the opportunity to not go into medical school with loans. And it worked out. Like, I couldn't have asked for more out of this journey. And so my short answer to that is no. My long answer is maybe there's a leg up, maybe there's a legacy component to certain schools, certain Ivy Leagues and that sort of things. But for those who don't have it, I don't worry about it, because the only person you're competing with is yourself. And I know that's like a cliche to say, but I promise you it matters more as you get more advanced, because everyone is better at something than you. And the most important thing to focus on is those things that you can change. And you often can't change your background or the school you go to.
Yeah, I totally second that. The Ivy League schools, in my opinion, really doesn't weigh heavily at all for me when I'm considering like advising clients. I will say the only other thing I'll add to if you have family members that are doctors, I don't. I also have a similar experience where I don't have anyone in medicine in my family, but I actually think this can be a hindrance for you if you do have folks in medicine, only in that some applicants tend to lean on that as like a component of their application, which I actually think is a mistake. Having, maybe your mom or dad is a physician, some folks tend to lean on that as like a strength of their application. And I think that's a mistake. Actually, I think really what you want to show is your accomplishments and your interests and all the things that you've done to inform yourself about the field. And really, I don't even feel that it needs to come up in your application at all, that your family is a physician. And that's how little I think it means in terms of your application.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for your feedback. And how do you guys feel about how many schools should be on the school list? Like a strong minimum and maximum number to apply to?
I feel like that's a very personalized decision. This is where like the counselors and the advising come in. I'd say there's a range I've seen, and people succeed with as little as I've seen like 20-ish schools, all the way up to, like, if you're really anxious about it and really can't narrow it down, 50 plus schools. But I think within that, there's an average range that I've seen, anywhere from like the 30s to 40s. And again, it depends. Are you applying MD, PhD? Are you trying to get in a certain residency program and therefore, like in the future, and therefore you have to spread it out more? Are you a very competitive applicant? Because then you can sometimes be a little bit more choosy about the list. So that's really, really hard question to answer without background info. But I would say starting with those numbers and seeing what else is out there and what we can provide in terms of general information would be a good start.
Yeah, my ideal average is probably in the 25 to 30 range. It's costly too. These are not free applications. And so oftentimes that is a limiting factor. I know for me personally, I applied to as many as I could afford, and it was around 20. So it definitely depends on everything Austin said. How competitive are you? Can you afford to apply to less schools because you're so competitive, or can you not afford that and you need to apply to more, just to like broaden your net? So it's a little bit applicant specific, but I would prefer if we're in the 25-ish range, at least.
Great, thank you. The next question, also a great question. Are there really any safeties for medical school?
Yeah, great question. And we say safety, and I don't really think that any schools are safe. I think this process is incredibly competitive. All of the people you're competing against are the highest achievers in the country, including yourself as an applicant. And so when you're already in that top 1%, really no schools are safety schools. But we refer to safety schools really as, we use that term just as based on your statistics and your application, what schools are most likely to accept you, or like what does their matriculant class look like, and does it look like your application? So we use that term kind of loosely as like a phrase to understand each other, but I agree that there's really, this is just a hard process and everyone's competitive, so probably no safe school.
Yeah. Kind of along those lines with the next question, it says, how important is it to match a student's GPA and MCAT scores to the school's average scores? Asking whether schools consider yield likelihood of a student with GPA MCAT score higher than average from a school ending up attending that particular school.
I think this is a good like benchmark to develop a list dependent on competitiveness, but ultimately most of these schools are trying to build a cohort that is diverse in personality as much as their backgrounds and the achievements and experiences they bring. So yes, those, you'll notice that like rankings sometimes coincide with higher GPAs and MCATs, but it's one of those things where you can have information about building a list so that you create the right amount and number of priorities. But I wouldn't really factor that into school selection beyond knowing your general competitiveness for a certain school rather than another one.
I agree. These are just two, GPA and MCAT are just two objective pieces of data that we have, whereas opposed to the rest of your application is kind of subjective. So we tend to use them like in all cases to develop that list, but I totally agree with what Austin said. It's just kind of used in that way to say, are we in the right range?
Simi asked, is there information somewhere on non-need based aid that schools may offer? So like any resources you guys can suggest?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, yeah, I actually don't know specific resources, but I know that that medical school websites usually have, I know that at least some do, but if not all, have sections on like available scholarships and the criteria for those scholarships, because I qualified for some before I applied. So you can look up, it may take some digging, but you can certainly look up what scholarships are available and what the criteria are. Some are just like interested in and have experience with underserved populations, or like interested in pediatrics. Like there's certainly some non-need based scholarships available, and you should be able to find those on each school's kind of website. I don't know of a resource in which it's like condensed into one place, but
no. Hopefully AI can help with that.
Awesome. Yeah. How effective is it to contact or meet with the contacts listed on MSAR? Do you think being proactive and meeting with admissions officers, for example, could give you any advantage or set you apart in the upcoming application cycle?
I would say I didn't necessarily reach out to those contacts unless there was like a certain piece of information that was missing that I was really looking at. I don't know if that has changed. And there are so many people that apply to med schools that, yes, I could see your thinking there, V2, about like, okay, well, I stand out because I was proactive and engaging. I think proactivity is really important and engagement is really important, but I don't know how much yield you'll get from directly just contacting everyone on that list, because they have to filter through so many things. in the end, if you can find information for like webinars, open houses, that would be a good point of contact. They often have the most up-to-date information that their websites don't have. But for the point of competitiveness, that is like a small sliver of what the larger picture is, in my opinion.
Thanks. Great answer. We have just a couple more. Would there be additional factors to consider for MD PhD programs?
I'm not an MD PhD myself, but I have helped clients with MD PhD program applications. And as you would guess, there's a lot more emphasis on research there. And I think for that reason, the factors to consider a fit for MD PhD is their funding, right? Like, can you get grants to do the research that's going to be supporting your stay at that medical school for however many years? So that sort of setting of having a lot of labs to choose from, a lot of the research that you're interested in is really, really important to consider. And then from your own background, considering your compatibility and competitiveness by getting research experience. So I think it really does revolve around like developing your idea of whether you're a fit for MD PhD program. And that really means, hey, do you love research? Because oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes MD PhDs become more research than clinical from what I've seen. And in that case, that's a whole other conversation about fit that would require probably another webinar.
Well, I love it. We can use that as another webinar topic. And just to wrap up the last couple, it's outside of your home state, how do you pick schools? Which I think you can elaborate on. You talked a little bit about the factors to consider in this presentation, but if you each had to pick, like, besides that in-state advantage, your top thing to look at when choosing schools out of state, what would you suggest?
Maybe two things quickly. One, just being like the environment of the city I would be living in. So even if you haven't been there, you can usually get a feel for, like, I don't know, the food selection, the social atmosphere, sports available, things like that. Like, if you really, I love live music, so I want to make sure that there's like a really good concert hall wherever I'm going. So things like that, like, am I gonna, on the spare weekends that I do get off of medical school studying, am I gonna be able to enjoy the area? So that was like touching on the location component we talked about. And then maybe just like feel for the culture of the school, ideally. Like, is this somewhere that's super formal or somewhere that's like really kind of welcoming and family-like? If I can get a feel for that, those would be how I'd pick.
I think the one unique one to throw on top of that I considered it relates is, like, are you actually going to be on a campus with like other professional students, other undergrads, other like disciplines? Because sometimes that can give you a great feel of like belonging. And I think there's a lot of schools that have that opportunity, but think about like, hey, can you go to the college sport games while you're a medical student? I think if that's really important to you, consider whether you're going to be on an isolated medical campus versus integrated with the rest of what the school is.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Well, it is about 9 o'clock, so I want to let everybody get back to their evenings. But Catherine and Austin, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing all of your expertise on building a school list. For any additional questions, if we didn't get to you in the chat, or you have some follow-up questions, would love for you to reach out to us. You can email us, call in, or right on the screen. You can book a consultation. Like I said, you'll probably be chatting with me. So would love to dig in a little deeper on how we can help. And thank you everybody who is also, suggesting the MD, PhD webinars. We love your feedback and love the ideas. So thank you everyone for joining today, and have a great rest of your evening.
Bye, everyone.